Welcome to the GovDiscovery AI podcast with Mike Shanley, your source for actionable insight into government markets and foreign policy. GovDiscovery AI leverages a decade of experience winning federal funding to deliver intel to sales, proposal, and capture teams working in defense and civilian markets. Now here's your host, Mike Shanley.
Welcome to the GovDiscovery AI podcast. I'm your host, Mike Shanley. Today our guest is Ben Solomon, CEO of FedTech. Ben, great to have you on the show today.
Hi, Mike. Great to be here.
So, Ben, let's get right into it. You recently, in the last few days, had a meeting at the White House as we're talking about innovation, startup market, DoD market. Could you share a bit about the topics that were covered during that conversation?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So as FedTech, we're a innovation services company. We run startup accelerators. We've worked with 1,000 companies in the last 10 years that have gone on to raise over $4 billion in capital. So we're always very interested when a new administration comes in to just understand what are their priorities around technology development, what are their priorities around how to work with the startup world, because that's germane, to the work we do. So had a good opportunity to hear about some of those topics. And the headline, that I came away with was, you're going to see this administration very focused on buying commercially ready solutions, right? I think there'll be, over time, maybe less emphasis on like funding, projects that might be 5-10 years away. It doesn't mean there's not going to be any of that, but you're going to see, much more focus on let's build or buy things that are already built. Build, if we are building, build very smartly, and budget, is certainly going to be an issue. But there's a lot of excitement also, just that even if you look at, kind of the idea that we could be in for a new generation of defense tech unicorns, right? Where, normally, right, you have the same 10 companies that are the 10 largest GovCons every single year, right? They've been that way probably for 30 years. And I think with this administration, you're going to start to see more emphasis on new participants, right? Companies that are going to move faster and maybe be more disruptive. So in the defense world, if you think about, Anduril, Saronic, Scale AI, those types of companies, I think are posed to do really good things.
Yeah, and we actually have Scale AI, a senior rep from there, coming on the show in a couple of weeks too, so it'll be interesting to follow up with them. Ben, with that, let's go to the historical perspective to set the stage here. What is the historical perspective for innovation funding in the DoD market? I think that'll give us some good context for discussing what's new in the current market.
Yeah, and I would say, so the way that the government views innovation in general, and when I say innovation, just to sort of give there's no one definition, but my kind of working definition is new technology being either developed or adopted in a way that creates, outsized gains, is kind of the way that I would view a definition of innovation versus business as usual. Starting about 5-10 years ago, you saw this innovation buzzword become very big, right? Where every agency developed their own innovation arm, right? Their own labs, their own kind of function that would be, empowering their workforce to be more creative and innovative, empowering their acquisition arms to be working with more novel companies, engaging, the venture world more constructively. So you saw kind of this big birth and explosion of every part of government kind of starting an innovation focus. I would say, in this probably peaked in the last maybe 3-4 years. And it's, I would say, starting to be more of a doubling down, where the very most productive organizations are getting more funding. So one example that some are probably aware of, so Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, started off as just an experiment, about 10 years ago. And they're an example of a consolidation of power, where their budget now is at $1 billion. They are running, really relevant projects like Replicator, where they're fielding, thousands of unmanned systems that'll be used, out in the field very quickly. So you're starting to see, a move away from like maybe the government funding really amorphous, okay, we're going to do a hackathon, we're going to do an event where we come talk about big ideas, to much more focused, okay, we're looking to buy, X type of solution really quickly, really efficiently. So using other transaction authorities, using commercial services, agreements, like getting the contracts done as leanly and as quickly as possible. So I think you're going to start to see, again, like the collapsing of the innovation community into nodes that are much more powerful and in some ways much more kind of all-encompassing.
So pretty high level, but for a startup that's listening to this or an investor that's listening to this, and they of course see the budget request over $1 trillion for the DoD budget, what are some of the high level criteria they should think about in terms of, hey, that's a lot, I think there's a fit for us, how do we move forward with this? What are some of the first questions you ask to see if a company is ready for the current or going forward, what the market looks like to support, I guess, and we can get into the nuance of the defense innovation side versus actual delivering direct services to DoD.
Yeah, there's really, I think, never been a better time if you're a startup and you want to be working with government or DoD for the first time. I always, when I talk to companies, which in my job, I'm lucky I get to do quite a bit. I always point them, the SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Program, to me is it's not maybe the sexiest program out there, but it's the best one for startups that are brand new to GovCon to get started. So for those that haven't heard of this, it's about a $2.5 to $3 billion a year program that's essentially a tax on all research programmatics and across government, gets pulled into a pocket of funding that goes exclusively to startups to develop technology-based products. Almost every agency has their own SBIR program, and many great companies, if you look at cybersecurity companies, iRobot, many companies that you would have heard of or use their products started with some form of SBIR funding. It's normally a relatively simple proposal to get started where you don't need to be a GovCon expert, to write. It's anywhere from a 5 to 20 page response. Normally, there's been a lot of work on the part of government to make it easier for companies to apply to SBIR. And then if you win, it's not a fast process, but within 6 months, if you win the SBIR, you're probably going to be on contract delivering at about 150K usually of performance, and then it can go up dramatically in the next phases. So I still say SBIR is a great way to get started. They're very competitive. There's a whole game that we could talk about of how to make yourself more competitive if you're a first-time bidder, on these types of projects. There's also, though, a lot of great prize competitions out there. So we're really fortunate. We get to work with the Army on a program called X-Tech Search, where they put out, Army has certain needs, they'll put out these calls for novel commercial companies to come and participate. And the initial award that the companies receive might be a very small amount of money on the order of thousands to come and do a pitch, right? And meet Army stakeholders. And then what the Army will do is if they like your solution, they'll keep on adding funding. You get more and more exposure to the point where eventually you're winning genuine, meaningful amounts of money. But almost every corner of government has prizes, really good opportunity for startups to get kind of going. And to me, it's so much about getting reps, right? Can you learn the game? Can you learn the process? Learn what it means to be a partner to the government? And these smaller, projects are often the way to do that.
So we just had Chris Watson, a VP of Business Development at Premise Data, on the show. We talked a bit about the SBIR grants and how great they are for just what you said, Ben, getting started in the market. But then actually another challenge can come after that of saying, great, we got SBIR funding. Can you go to your VC and say, look at that, we have product market fit in the DoD market? Or is there another bridge after that from, okay, how do you do that, to identifying a match to a scalable solution within the DoD market? What's your take on that conversation?
Yeah, so it's tricky. So it's an SBIR with DoD by itself is probably unlikely to be a meaningful signal of traction to a private investor, right? I think what I would advise a startup, if you win an SBIR, you have to tell a story. You have to figure out what's your story of how that gets you a foothold into an opportunity that's going to grow like a weed, right, within the DoD, where you could be selling, a high margin product onto a program that's growing and heading in the right direction. So if you can find those types of opportunities, that's probably a great way to say, hey, I want an SBIR. I want to do a private capital raise in tandem. Otherwise, it's hard. But I would say so. I think of it as almost like multiple valleys of death. Everybody always thinks that the first valley is kind of moving out of a research environment into a new product. I think there's multiple valleys where you could see companies that maybe win, a phase 2 is $1 million SBIR. They can even get a second phase 2. So you're starting to, rack up larger amounts of funding. But you probably at that point are still not at the point where you have a truly scalable solution that could go on to like a program of record. So that's where, just being super creative. And I would say for startups that are listening to this, get out of the building and like start doing your networking meetings, thinking about your transition plan literally on day one of your award, right? You're going to have your technical team. And maybe if you're a single person company and you're the technologist and the business development, that's great. You got to make time to get out, meet the programmatic people in DoD that you might work with later on, start building those relationships. When I got started in this business 10 years ago, there was kind of this misperception I had, at least, that like DoD doesn't want to talk to you, right? It's a big monolithic, inaccessible, organism. It's actually not the case, right? Like if you reach out to people, you can find them on LinkedIn, you can find them on, at events. A lot of people within DoD programs will give you that initial meeting, right? You got usually, a 20-minute meeting. You better be interesting. You better be relevant. You don't want to come in, without that attribute, and have it if you expect it to kind of go somewhere. But they will give you the time is one of the lessons I've learned.
Yeah, and that's totally agree with that, Ben. And that's one thing that we'll do for clients is help them align those talking points when they have those meetings with the department priorities. So with that, Ben, all right, startup, we got a fit, we got a little bit of funding, we're going to go to some events. What are your recommendations for the prepping for that? They're not shaping the RFP at this point. They're really introducing their company, but you don't want to just be talking, here's what I do. Hey, do you want to buy this? You got to understand their priorities too. How do you advise someone that's just getting started selling to DoD or say totally new to government sales on how to prep for some of those initial in-person meetings that might not be scheduled, might be more one-on-ones on the side at a conference?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's similar advice that I give our sales team is do about 70% listening and 30% talking, especially in those early conversations, right? You have to share enough about what you're working on to be proving, value, proving relevance, having it. You can't just sit and listen 100% of the time, but you want to listen in these early conversations much more than you talk. And in doing so, you're actually going to pull out information that's dramatically helpful in your product development, because very rarely, right, are you going to invent something, in your garage, in your lab, whatever it might be, that the government wants to buy, just in like its entirety without any additional work, right? There's always going to be a sort of development level, layer that happens that actually is very conducive to selling services, right? So a lot of startups, don't realize that, like, if you have a system, you want to sell that system, you can also make a lot of great money, selling the implementation and the development and the customization of that system alongside the actual product sale. So be open to not doing a hard sale right out of the gate, right? Of like, I have this widget, you need this widget, you got to buy it. Listen more than you talk, listen, and that's going to inform kind of how you build upon your widget, or potentially build a different widget that is much more scalable than anything you could imagine.
So Ben, can you share a case study? I mean, this is really interesting and totally agree with you. Could you share a story of where you've seen this work, and love to hear something, a FedTech client or company that your teams work with and really supported. What does that look like?
Yeah, so one of our companies, so at FedTech, we have a program that we call our Startup Studio, where we'll work with research labs to identify inventions in the labs, and then we recruit outside founders and bring the technology and the people together to form startups. So we've run this program for 10 years now. We've started about 180 spinoffs, usually from federal government labs. So we work with the Defense Department, we work with Department of Homeland Security, NASA, the national labs within DOE. We work with almost everyone in government on this program. And we had a company come out of NASA technology a few years ago called Canopy Aerospace that I'm really proud of what they've been able to achieve. So NASA had developed low-cost ceramics that are 3D printable for hypersonics and orbital reentry, right? So like if you look at, if you go to an Air and Space Museum and you look at a capsule, that's coming back into the atmosphere, right? You'll see all these heat plates on them to protect, the people or the material coming back in. Those are really super expensive and it's in-depth process to make heat shields. our guys, worked with NASA, our entrepreneurs, and took this technology out of the lab that essentially can make way lower costs by orders of magnitude, printed ceramics that protect, on heat reentry and also protect on, hypersonics. And they were able to get this technology out of the lab. The entrepreneurs we paired were interesting. So one of them was a material science PhD. The other one was a former B-52 weapons officer, so came out of the Air Force, so very familiar with that mission space. And they've been able to, in some ways, like leverage the best of government funding, where they've won prizes, they've won SBIRs. They started to use that momentum to raise private capital. So they probably have raised about 10 million in private funding. And now they have a solution, that they're able to get out into the market and sell in a hot area, right? Hypersonics, big topic area, lots of funding flying around now.
That just brought up a separate question for you, Ben. Do you see a startup profile in terms of like the ownership, the founder makeup that is typically most successful? You mentioned former military. Is that essential? Is it more essential to have that, a CTO out of Boulder, or Austin, or Stanford, or something like that? Is it better to have that visionary that came out of DC and knows government contracting? Is there one profile in terms of that makeup that you see that's most successful, or does that really, really vary?
I would say there's no one profile, and that's the wonderful thing about startups, right? Is that you can start a company at any phase of life, any age, and with any background, and the only thing that is your measuring stick is, are you able to sell a product that somebody wants, right? And everything else doesn't matter. So there's no one. I do notice traits, though. The best companies that I see, if they are missing certain types of talent on their team, they're very good at finding advisors that can be partners to their founding team. So our best companies, for example, like if they want to sell to DoD, it's really important to get people that understand the mission space that you want to sell into. So this could be, people that have retired out of the services. This could be people that, formerly or even currently work at big defense contractors. And one of the messages I would have for young companies is, so often you can get really great advisors to be a part of your story, a part of your mission in a fractional sense, right? Just by offering some shares, right? Give them a little bit of stock, give them a chance to help you. And like people's desire to help is so strong that so often you're going to find great people that can really help your company grow. And you can fill in that expertise, right? So if you need engineering talent of a certain type, and maybe you can't even afford it, you can't afford a full-time person, see if you can find a great advisor that can help you along the way. But Mike, to answer your question, yeah, there's no one formula. All formulas work provided the founders have the right hustle and the right motivation.
Yeah, and it sounds like maybe there is that you got to have that business vision, you got to have that tech side, which maybe even AI coding can be part of that, and you got to have that industry side. But what it sounds like, they don't all have to be in your founder profile. There can be other ways to bring in that talent to be part of the team.
I think so. Yeah. And just, for founders that are right out of the gate, there's only a couple things you got to worry about. Number one is hustling as hard as you possibly can, right? The entrepreneur by nature has to like run. And if you hit a wall, right, you move around that wall or you knock that wall down, but you got to go hard, right? And in doing so, focus on like, are you able to identify a need in the market that you think you can solve, right? And focusing solely on that market in those early stages of like, okay, what is the problem that I want to be a part of solving? Because if you don't get that right, it's very hard. You can have a spectacular product and still be not a company.
Well, let's talk acquisition reform. So FAR reform, federal acquisition regulation. What are you seeing so far there? And for those newer to the government market for this episode, those are the high-level acquisition terms, regulations, rules that are undergoing significant review, potentially reform right now. What are you seeing there that might indicate what direction that's going for startups, or Ben, what would you hope to see come out of that to improve the acquisition process for startups outside of government to bring this innovation to DoD?
Yeah, I think you're going to see, more emphasis on like, how do we create acquisition pathways that are much less bureaucratic, much less red tape, much faster especially for commercial facing companies, right? Because if you go out to Silicon Valley, and I've done this, right? Where like I'll go to like a top tier incubator and I'll meet all these wonderful companies and bring up like, hey, there's a big market. The biggest market in the world, right, is actually selling to the U.S. government. There's this concern, right, that it'll break their commercial line of business if they have to organize themselves and for the compliance and for the long sales cycles and all of that of government work. So they almost would rather stay away from it. Their investors don't want them to do it. And I always get saddened by that. And I think what you're seeing and you're going to see more of is, can we use contracting vehicles and can we train our government buyers on methods of buying that are much lighter, from a compliance standpoint, and in some ways will incentivize those companies that are producing great products, may have great services, but don't want to work with government. You'll see them starting to get pulled in more and more. And that might come at the cost, right, of for the big, kind of primes and the Beltway bandits, right? Business might get harder because you're going to have more competition. Some of the legacy advantages that come from owning, big contract vehicles that nobody else has access to, nobody else knows the customer, no one else knows how to use the vehicle, that might start to hypothetically become less of a strategic advantage than it once was.
Do you also think that the Palantirs and SpaceXs that have bridged that gap and show that there is a path to a scalable solution in this large market, are they the outliers, or are they the early signals on a trend that at least now a startup can point to? Hey, look at Palantir, they did it. That's the path we're going on.
I think you're going to see more and more, just new companies that are, it's like this idea of a defense unicorn. You just don't see it very often, right? There's a lot of companies in defense that, maybe are worth, 1 to 100 or 100, 200 million, in enterprise value. But in terms of being, a $1 billion defense company, it starts to really fade off. And I think you're going to see more of the, the great companies with the great innovators that grow, to be more that unicorn status, to where, a Palantir will be less of an anomaly going forward. I hope that's the case. And again, if you just look at like the past 30 years, right, it's been the same 10, 20 big defense companies that are always, and they may change the order of ranking of total value, but it's always the same group. I think you're going to see that change, in the next 20 years.
It'll also be interesting. We're tracking closely the 5% NATO spend. We'll do a couple episodes coming up on that. I understand you're just focused on the USG market, DoD. Are you looking at that at all, or is that even part of the conversation of, hey, if there's market fit here, maybe some of these NATO allies are also going to want to buy it as they 1 to 5x their spend?
Yeah, I think right now, just based on the sort of geopolitical forces, you can't be a GovCon and like not think about NATO, in my opinion. So like for FedTech, we absolutely we talked to NATO. We've been aware of there's the NATO Diana Innovation Fund. That's a terrific effort that is a big pool of funding that can pool and fund great tech startups for allied use. So. So I think you have to be looking abroad for FedTech. We do programs in India. We're looking to expand to the Middle East. We've done a lot of stuff in Europe. So we definitely have aspirations of being a global company for the work that we do, which is accelerating tech to market. So excited to see where that turns out. But yeah, you got to be open to NATO.
Yeah. Well, from our side, we're focused in this market, as you know, is on the business development side and focused really on capture readiness, opportunity qualification, getting our clients the intel they need to align their solutioning with the administration's priorities, get talking points, all that. From your perspective, Ben, I guess both for FedTech as well as for the startups, what are you seeing as some of the biggest business development challenges? And what's your advice for a growth leader, whether it is what you said, a one-person startup where you're the engineering lead and business development, or a 50, 100, 200 person team that really is looking to invest in growth in the DoD market?
Yeah, it kind of relates, Mike, to something that we were talking about, before we went live, of just the government changed so dramatically in the past 6 months, right? That to me, when I think about just the big challenges for biz dev and growth, it's things like the following. It's like, okay, like the people that, at least a lot of the people that I knew and had relationships with are out. They left. They took the fork. They have moved on. So in some ways, you have to kind of reinvent your relationship structure that you want to, and the people that will be the the sources of sales and the sources of warm intros, right? And frankly, the sources of just, being able to have a network inside government makes it's more fun, right? To have friends and to have colleagues. So in some ways, I think there just is going to be a process of like needing to get out of your office and like rebuild those networks. So I'd encourage, biz dev people to like go to that networking event, go to the conference, even if you don't want to. You sort of got to but with that comes just an immense opportunity where there's going to be new power structures forming, right? We've seen this already where like some of the people in government that were previously lower on the totem pole, their bosses and their bosses have left, and now they got promoted up, and now they have a lot of budget and a lot of responsibility. So that's definitely, that's a challenge. So rebuilding your network. I would say also the pace of RFPs and awards. We saw a big dip, as I'm sure many folks listening to this did, in the kind of early spring time frame. Hopefully that's starting to change, right? Where we're starting to see, more proposals, opportunities coming out, more awards getting made, stuff getting processed more quickly. So I really hope we're over that hump, but that's still, a challenge for anybody that cares about growth.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that face-to-face is so important, and that's where we focused everything on minimizing that desk research that has to be done and making sure that everyone's prepped for those. So, Ben, we've talked about FedTech, touched on it a little bit, but can we focus a little bit more directly on what it is that FedTech does, and how do you support innovation in the DoD market?
Yeah, definitely. So we FedTech really does three things. So we spin off companies from research labs. I mentioned that a little bit, where we have a whole team of amazingly smart researchers and scientists that go in and like evaluate intellectual property that the government or university or even sometimes a corporation has developed. And we say, okay, we believe there's an upside with this invention to create a new product and ultimately create a new company. So we have a whole line of business that does that, where we'll source the inventions from over 100 labs around the country. We'll go out and recruit founders that have these amazing backgrounds. We bring them together with the technology and manufacture spinoffs really from the ground up. So super proud of that work. That was kind of my brainchild back 10 years ago when FedTech started. The second big thing we do is work to accelerate companies that are really brand new to working with the government. So we have amazing partnerships in organizations like the Army and Navy and others, where they'll give the funding to the startup. FedTech will run the accelerator that helps that startup be successful in scaling their solution and growing. So we run accelerators that serve that purpose. And then the last thing is we'll go in and we'll actually partner with research labs like Army Research Lab, like NASA, and teach researchers more commercially focused kind of product development and innovation methodologies. So we're really proud of that work, where we can maybe help a research lab that does $1 billion in research every year. If we can help them just be a little bit more effective in making that research affect the warfighter, affect the stakeholder downstream in a positive way, then we've done our job.
So what's the best way for government, industry, new partners to get in touch with you and your team, Ben?
Yep, check out our website, fedtech.io. There's multiple ways to get involved. I just would call out, we're constantly hiring. We've been able to grow, a lot even through these challenging times. So we'd love to hear from you if you're interested in working with us. If you are interested, we really value mentors in our programs also. So if you want to help a young company be successful, and if you have an interesting, expertise at the intersection of technology and government, we absolutely would love to hear from you. There's chances to get paired up with amazing companies that you can be a big part of their journey. And then anyone, of course, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always interested in chatting with folks.
Excellent. Well, as we wrap up here, we always like to ask, so what? So from our conversation today, what's the so what that you want to leave for our listeners in the DoD market?
Yeah, just I guess the so what is be hungry. Even though we're coming out of what's been a challenging time, with that challenge just creates such immense opportunity. There's changes happening that if you're at the table and driving those changes for your customers, you can grow, and this could be looked at as a very positive period. Is kind of my so what, and that's what I ask our team to focus on every day at FedTech.
Great. Well, hey, Ben, thanks for taking a bit of time out of your day to share that insight with us. Really appreciate it, and definitely follow and connect with Ben on LinkedIn and check out FedTech's website. So thanks for being on the GovDiscovery AI podcast today, Ben.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the GovDiscovery AI podcast with Mike Shanley. GovDiscovery AI leverages our team's decade of experience winning federal funding to deliver federal growth intel to sales, proposal, and capture teams working in defense and civilian markets. Each market intel report is delivered by federal growth experts leveraging our proprietary deep data discovery process. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and connect with GovDiscovery AI and Mike Shanley on LinkedIn, or learn more at govdiscoveryai.com.